Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session. I'm Jason Medley, and I'm the Chief People Officer for Codility. Codility is a talent assessment platform, and I'm really excited to introduce to you our panelists today. But before we do that, just a little bit about today's session. The panel that I have the opportunity to moderate today are really passionate about the D&I space. I know they're going to bring some amazing content and some amazing ideas and thoughts to the conversation. But before I introduce the panelists or panelists, as you get ready to introduce yourselves, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about, of course, who you are, your role in the organization that you work within, but also I'd love to understand a little bit about the journey that you've taken to get to where you're at in your career, and why this topic specifically today, talking about the listening side of D&I conversations, is so important to you. And so I'd like to introduce CJ Bedford first. CJ, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jason, and really great to be here today. Thank you so much. My name is DJ Bedford. I'm Director of People and Performance in an organisation called Wiser. We are a creative recruitment and consulting business with a purpose to change the way people think about work. And I suppose that's where I come to kind of be here and talking about this topic. I'm super passionate about making sure there's opportunity for everybody in organisations. And some of the ways we've sort of hopefully changed the way our people think around work is to have really open discussions with them around issues around diversity, inclusion, and just being super open with them around them sharing their experiences and us listening to them as an organisation and reflecting on what we could do better. For Wiser, I feel my responsibility is to make sure our culture lives up to our purpose to change the way people think about work. I also consult our clients on diversity inclusion and look after our kind of RPO business, where our differentiator is diversity inclusion hiring. So like super excited to be talking about this with you guys and really passionate about the subject.
Amazing. Welcome. We're going to have a lot of fun today, CJ, learning about what you're learning in those conversations. And Susan, Hailey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am the head of both global talent acquisition and EDI for a software company called OpenText. We are an enterprise information management software company, so we compete with companies like Box that you probably have heard of. Been around a long time, came out of Canada, University of Waterloo specifically, and now are headquartered in California. So we have about 15,000 employees, 3 billion in revenue. We're operating in 34 countries. We hire about 4,000 people a year. And so I've got kind of a two-headed job right now. I came to it via talent acquisition. But I've had a passion for equity, diversity, inclusion kind of my whole life. And prior to coming to OpenText, I had a job running a nonprofit here in Silicon Valley that was focused on helping women entrepreneurs get access to funding, advisors, board members, business knowledge, because many of them were techies and didn't know kind of the business side. So I've been doing this a long time, but at OpenText, I've been here 2 years. And when we get into it, I can tell you the journey that OpenText has been on, because this is a new journey for our company, but very excited because we have a highly engaged CEO, which makes all the difference.
Yes, welcome. We'll talk about some of those great CEOs in a little bit as well. So I really want to get right into this, right? So we, as people and talent leaders, we spend a lot of time going to conferences where diversity, inclusion, equity, for the past really 5 years or so, this has been a big topic. And in the last couple of years, we've sort of seen a little bit of a turn internally inside organizations where talent's really starting to demand more. But I think we'd probably all agree that in most organizations, we're not seeing the needle moved as much as it should have been in terms of diversity and the overall feeling of inclusion and belonging. Just first, where are we getting it wrong? Like, what's going on? And CJ, why don't we start with you on this?
Thank you, Jason. So It's a really big topic, and I think some organisations start with it from an individual perspective. So some organisations might come to their EDI strategy through go, right, okay, let's recognise that our organisation isn't as diverse as we want to, so let's start hiring for more diverse talent, which is great, and it's a really great start, and it's a commitment, and it's the first step on the journey. But we can't recruit diverse people into an organisation that doesn't feel inclusive. And I think one thing that people don't necessarily recognise is that diversity inclusion is a whole system. They try to fix bits of it in isolation, but you've got to think about it as a whole system. It permeates through every aspect of culture within the organisation. And Susan, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit around this, and engagement from senior leaders is the most important thing. And we don't just mean that kind of box ticking, yes, of course, I know this is important, but putting your money where your mouth is and investing in it, I think, is absolutely essential. And if you try and fix one bit, something over there is going to fall off. So think of everything as a system rather than just individual parts.
Got you. And Susan, I think you've had lots of experience, and you're running, really a global organization right now. What in the work that you've done, where in what you're seeing other organizations do, where are they getting it wrong? And what are even some of the lessons maybe that you've learned in terms of getting it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think every company is different, obviously, different markets, customers, segments, that sort of thing. With OpenText, we're a tech company. So we kind of compare ourselves to other tech companies, especially on the diversity angle. And what we had done prior to FY21, so what we did my first year here, and what we had been doing before I even got to OpenText, was we could agree on the fact that women were underrepresented in tech, and they were underrepresented at OpenText. So the small, tiny, minuscule investment that we made was all around women. And that included, because we have 3,000 employees in India, for example. So we could all agree that we need to do a better job with women. So we were, small investments. I personally, in that year, I also look after all of executive search. So that year I started to require diverse slates. I kind of did a little bit of extra leaning towards the female candidates. And quite frankly, we did really well. We went from 20% of our VPs and above as women to 28%. And that was just one by one hiring, literally. So that was good. But then for us, and maybe for many other companies, George Floyd was murdered. And when he was murdered, our CEO was profoundly impacted and was profoundly moved. And the conversation, from FY20 to coming for us, FY21, we start our fiscal in July, completely changed. And our CEO said, I need to hear from our Black employees, and I need to hear what they're worrying about. I need to understand it better. He's a white, 55-year-old guy, been in tech his whole career. He said, I don't know. And I think his humility around not knowing and his public statement about not knowing really was the opening to being able to start to listen to our employees. So, and we did it, like 5 active listening tours with 12 people each. We probably talked to 70 people. I actually wrote a deck and he's a very talkative guy. And I wrote a deck and I said, this is what the definition of listening means. It means not talking. And you get to say 2 things. You get to say welcome and thank you, because they're not going to talk if you talk. Anyhow, that led to an entire year of activities. And I'll just close at least this segment on the fact that the biggest thing we heard was that jobs, getting and finding work. Now, again, this is just our Black employees. Mm-hmm. Like getting and finding work is the biggest single worry that group has. So jobs became kind of the cry within our company. And I can talk more about what we're planning to do on that and what we have done, but listening was powerful.
I love the prep work as well, right? Especially the prep work for your CEO. I think a lot of times we underestimate that piece for sure. And CJ, speaking of, and I definitely want to get to the impact of this in a moment, Susan, but trying to operationalize this, right? This is something that we've done at Codility as well. We've realized Codility is a global organization. We realized that some people didn't understand. We just came out of pride. We realized that some people didn't even understand what, in some cultures, what pride really is. And we were thinking about how do we educate in a way that's authentic. And I know that you and I have talked about having these sort of authentic conversations. How have you done this at Wiser, and how do you actually operationalize it? Like, how do you birth it from scratch? If you're sitting in the audience today and you're like, you know what, I want more of these authentic conversations. How do we do that?
So I suppose we're lucky because we are kind of small and perfectly formed, but it's much more difficult, I think, as you're talking about in a global organisation. We came to this through a case that happened in the UK where a lady called Sarah Everard was kidnapped by a police officer, and I was hearing a lot from our women around, look, I'm really scared, I'm really anxious to go out at this time. London doesn't feel safe for me. And what we started with is just we invited people to a conversation. So look, we've got no agenda here apart from to listen to you, for all of our people to hear what you're experiencing and to think about how we can be better as Wiser to help our people feel safe and feel secure in what they're doing. And we did that, and people shared some absolutely heart-wrenching situations that they've been through. A lot of people were literally in tears on the call, but it was amazing to bring together our organisation. And this was kind of focused on women, but a lot of our men shared some of the experiences that they'd had as well. And we did this very recently on the back of we did this on Monday, actually, on the back of the racism that the England players had experienced on the back of the football, and that really affected our people. So we did this again, and we didn't do anything apart from to say, would anybody like to share an experience? And you have to hold the silence and people will share. And we had really lucky to have people who've been in the organisation that had joined that day or had joined the week before, sharing some of their emotional experiences. And I think just being open and vulnerable and curious. So you don't have to have the whole organisation there. You as a leader, manager, as somebody in TA can easily sit down with your team and have that conversation.
And I love this because for many leaders, it's extreme. To Susan's point earlier, it's very hard for them to listen. It's very hard for them to give up that control and allow their teams and themselves to be vulnerable in that moment as well. CJ, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from having an experience like that?
The biggest takeaway from me was, if I'm honest, the power of listening. So just especially for our white people to hear some of the aspects of racism that our Black and Asian people had been experiencing, and it probably just hadn't, so they noticed a little bit on social media, but that personal experience, the person who sits next to me or the person I'm on Zoom with tomorrow has actually felt that. And I think it gets people to really reflect on their behaviours when it's not just a thing that's happening over there, it's a thing that's happening to my colleague. And I think that is really powerful.
I love it. As you were talking, it reminded me, so at Codility, we did a LGBTQ plus panel discussion not too long ago where there were individuals in our organization who really put their hand up and said, I want to help share my experience so people understand. And one of the examples that came up was that in the US, many gay men can't donate blood, for example. And it's things that like that people don't know or don't understand. And it was shocking to some people. And then the idea of, for many folks who come from many underrepresented backgrounds in the recruitment process, they're reluctant to talk about their experiences or their partners or because they don't know how inclusive the organization is. And these things started to come out in real life, not from me saying it, right? But from people within our organization actually speaking. And so the impact can really be real for sure. Susan, and speaking of impact, tell us more about the impact through your initiatives, because I'm very, very interested. We have, so in the audience, and by the way, for everyone watching today, I mean, we have organizations of all sizes. And so I love the difference in the perspectives that both of you bring, but what has been the impact sort of coming out of that in your organization this year?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things, and it did start with listening. Yeah, let me just say one thing. And again, we focused initially back in June. Well, obviously we've done women for a long time, and we're starting to get some progress on our numbers. But for our Black employees, I mean, it got to the point of even for them telling us that it's never been okay to talk about race at work, at least in the United States, maybe in other countries, but not in the US. And our Black colleagues told us that their mentors and family and whatever told them never talk about race at work. You will be viewed as an agitator, you'll be viewed as a troublemaker, so never talk about it. So once we learned that, it was like, whoa, 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 we've got to be able to talk about this at work. It's got to be an open and safe place to have that conversation. So, and it was down to things like, you know, Canadians, it was kind of a bad thing for Canadians to call people Black. That was what they were told. And my Canadian colleagues were like, they were sort of bristling when I would say, well, our Black employees said this, and they're like, is that okay? So we asked, and of course, you know, all our Black employees said, it's fine, that's okay. You know, so, and I think the other thing we learned was we can make mistakes because none of us are perfect. Mm-hmm. And especially with our Black employees, you know, at least our employees couldn't be more gracious about, you know, that kind of hurts my feelings. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. So we got to a point where we could have these conversations much more openly and much more like grown-ups. So that was one impact. But in terms of specific things, oh my gosh, we have done, like, we didn't even have affinity groups at OpenText. You know, we had sort of a loose affiliation of women in India that would meet once every 3 months. Well, we now have three affinity groups. We have the B, which is the Black Empowerment Group. We have WIT, Women in Technology, and we have Q&A, which is Queers and Allies for our LGBTQ, and they're global. We're going to start one. We're Canadian roots. We have a lot of issues right now in Canada with the Indigenous population. Many of you probably read about some of the things going on there. So we're now going down a path with particularly in Canada, the Indigenous population. In addition, I mean, we've done so much. It's been kind of a blurred, busy year. I assigned one of my recruiters to be an EDI recruiter for sourcing because there's fantastic sourcing that we were not taking advantage of. We've never had an intern program, believe it or not. Big company like us, we haven't had real kind of, which is a great, early stage talent is a great place to get diversity. So we're forging a partnership with Howard in the US and then Lakehead University in Canada, which is the largest, has the largest population of Indigenous Canadians. So that's all underway. We've changed our policies. We never had, in fact, we just agreed we're going to do Juneteenth as a holiday in the United States. We never had that holiday before. We've had our CEO on any kind of racial or social injustice over this past year, and there have been many, and they're not all race related. He has written a note. He's just completely embraced this. And so I would say, just in terms of impact, we are fortunate that we have a CEO. In fact, when I said we were going through the whole process, and I said, so Mark, which ELT, which exec do you want to have be the exec sponsor? Thinking, he's got a busy plate. He goes, no, that's me. I'm in charge. Okay. So, it was like the best thing you could have. And I'd say the one challenge we have right now, I want to leave time, but it's an interesting challenge, and because I don't think anybody's doing it. In fact, I know nobody's doing it, is truly measuring diversity across our corporation. Because the only two places where we operate, we're in 34 countries, but the only two places where we operate where it's required to ask about ethnicity is the United States and South Africa. And in the US, you don't have to answer it. So when our CEO, who's a data product guy, is like, well, how many do we have? I said, well, 50% answered. He goes, that's not good enough. I said, well, it's not required. You don't have to answer these questions. So we're going through a very deep dive on how to get better data, because we know once we have better data, we can start to do better pay equity and we can start to do really good things. But that's a huge challenge.
We ran into the same thing, and not to go off tangent here, but one of the things I found that helps. So in some cultures, they're so black and white by the book. Like in the US, you buy into more of truly sort of the impact of diversity and what that means and impact on your product. I find that, so we're a SaaS organization. When I help them understand that a lot of our customers want to understand our DE&I roadmaps, they want to understand our metrics, they want to understand, when you make it like, when you take it back to the core business and the black and white, there's many cultures out there that are like, makes sense, totally, I'll do it, right? Because we ran into the exact same thing. CJ, a couple questions for you really quick, because I want to make sure that we get this in when we're talking about listening. One is, how do we have these conversations in a way where all the burden isn't on the folks coming from underrepresented populations, where it's not up to them to do the job of educating, right? So that's one. And then two, how do we, and I know you and I've had a conversation about ERGs and infinity groups, how do we bring the knowledge out of those ERG groups and balancing my first question, which is not putting all the burden on them? Like how do we do this? Like, just how do we do that? Yeah.
Two very tough ones, Jason, thanks. So in answering the first one, how do we not put the burden of understanding on our people from underrepresented groups? And I think this is a really difficult one. I think openness in conversation in every aspect is really important. I'm not sure that in the UK, at least, we've got a great enough understanding of some of the challenges faced by our underrepresented groups that we're not ready to, I think we're going to have to ask them to continue to help us understand, because so if we look at the sort of progress of women in the UK, for example, and globally, it's been significantly supercharged recently over the last 20 years, but I still feel behind in terms of our organizations and other organizations understanding of how we can create an organization where people can feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. And we talk about ERGs, affinity groups. I'm kind of in two minds, and like, it's a little bit controversial to say it. I think it's important for our people to have a space where they can feel wholly comfortable being themselves and connect with people in a really easy fashion. But I also wonder how far ERGs or affinity groups go, because a lot of people identify with a number of different underrepresented groups, and should I be a part of all of them? Where should I put myself? And sometimes when we look at people in through the lens of representation, there's always somebody who's excluded. So who are we not including in our ERG group? And also getting a sense of if we are speaking about what people are, we're not sharing about what they are not. And everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a story to tell and a journey they've been on. So how can we make organizations holistically inclusive and break down all of those barriers rather than doing something slightly different for different groups? And in the work I do with clients, I really try to get them to think about, right, how can we just break down all of the barriers and start from a place of real openness and bringing your whole self to work, rather than thinking about people through a particular lens.
Yeah, and so sort of creating a culture internally that allows people to be comfortable and be more authentic. And I'll let you know if this is successful, but this quarter I'm actually starting a series of an internal podcast called Authentic Conversations, where on-demand content, where it's people of all different levels, functions, organizations, different countries, where we just share, we get real. What are the anxieties you have, the fears? What have you overcome in your career? I'll let you know how it is, but our thought was, hey, this is, now we're all remote first. This is a way they can pull the content as they want it, but it's also great for candidates coming through our process. Like, what are we about? Who are our people? And so I'll let you know how it goes, but I agree with you. Like, there's not a perfect answer to that, right? And just trying to figure out how to continue to harvest the type of culture that you want is going to be that challenge. How do we, just switching gears here in the last few minutes, how do we take these learnings of listenings and these learnings that we have throughout these conversations and on while we're on listening tours or whatever we want to call, how do we then translate that into a talent acquisition strategy that makes us effective in terms of diversity and inclusion? How do we bridge those two? Either one of you can take that. I know it's a mini question.
I'll start. I mean, listen, it's probably one of the hardest things to bring to life. because it means putting resources against things that might not, result in a hire straight away. So I look at it, at least from the TA perspective, I look at it as requiring diverse slates. Just no fooling around. You just have to have a diverse slate, and it starts at the top. So it's all your exec roles have to have a diverse slate, including your board and your board selection process. I think it is a diversity sourcing exercise where every single possible group that has the talent that you want, that represents the diversity you want, that you are connected to. I said it before, I think college and intern, that's like not exactly rocket science. I mean, everybody knows that. So I think those are the three things that I would start with. I even have on my team people saying, I can't find diverse talent, and telling our hiring managers that. I'm like, that is like not okay. Like, we will find the diverse talent. It is there. But we do have to support our teams in helping to find it, because they've all got busy rec loads and they're all busy trying to just do the best they can to get the jobs filled. But those are the three things I would say.
Love that. Thank you for sharing. CJ, any thoughts there?
And I think also organisations need to challenge themselves on their barriers to entry and their entry requirements for particular roles. A lot of what the sort of hiring we've done in the UK is we do contextually. So we look at the schools people have been to and balance that from their university grades. And we have done it really successfully with a number of our clients and said, right, you need to put your academic requirements down to get a more diverse group, because the pipeline from especially schooling in the UK, from school into university, if you have been to a school from a challenging area, you are much less likely to go to university and get a particular grade. And so I think there's a really big challenge to organisations of like, where do we really need that degree from that university? Is that a real thing, or is that just our pride and who we think we should have around us? So I think some barriers to entry knocking down is really important.
All right. And last question, Susan, because I promised you I'd do this, and you spoke to it a little earlier, but look, we have TA leaders, we have recruiters, we have managers in the audience, and some of them are going, I love this conversation. I want to get real in my own business, but I just do not have the support of my CEO or the execs above me. What is your advice? What should they do?
Yeah. Well, I think I would say, if you're really passionate about this topic and you really want to do the work, you find an organization that is passionate about it and a CEO who is completely, totally committed. Because life's short. And you're going to waste your time. And By the way, if you're going to make a job change, this couldn't be a better time to do it.
You are exactly right. There are plenty of jobs. If your CEO is not helping you with this, there are plenty of organizations who will, for sure.
Right. All right, and more than ever.
Yes. Well, Susan and CJ, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. We still all have a long ways to go, but I think we can agree that doing significantly more listening will take us a long way. So thank you both for your time, and thank you to the audience who participated and listened. And please stay with us for our next panel discussion.
Thanks, Jason. Great moderating.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Bye.